Good morning. There's an interesting geographical feature up in Wyoming, uh, somewhere in the Black Hills region, and it's part of what's called Bear Lodge Butte. And it's called Devil's Tower. And it's this really interesting formation because there's woodlands around and there's some plains and woodlands kind of come together. Then this rock monolith just kind of comes out of the ground and it goes up 867 feet. And there's a Native American mythology of its creation. And I'm sure there's all kinds of variations of this, but this is one that I'm aware of. So, once upon a time, as it goes, there were 7 children, 3 girls and 1 boy, and they were siblings, so sisters and a brother. And they were playing in the woods. Now, before we get into their playing, what you have to understand about them is that if we take a closer look at these children, the girls, something they all had in common is that they were absolutely fascinated by the stars at night and fascinated by the ethereal feel of the stars, the heavens, the heavenly realms, that form of wisdom, that form of being able to look down and to take a universal view and to inhabit what religious science calls the mind of God in that way. And the boy, the brother, he was really fascinated with what it was to be a bear. He grew up. He almost had like this fear of bears. He had this feel, the sense of their strength and their veracity. And he wondered about their wisdoms, the wisdom that they had of being able to open up to the earthly planes, the material realms, as opposed to the ethereal. All of the medicines and all the truths and all the wisdoms that were contained in the earth that were placed there by the great Creator. So these children one day were playing in the woods and they were chasing each other around and playing all kinds of different games. And at one point, the brother was just off by himself, just briefly, and the forest spoke out to him and said, "Would you like to inhabit the bear spirit?" And the brother was kind of taken back by that, and well, sure, I would love to inhabit the bear spirit. And so he became a bear. And he was being unfamiliar with the energies of the bears. He was overcome with aggression and assertiveness and courage and this incredible vitality. And so he began to chase his sisters around, and they became very frightened. And they were running away from him, and they had no idea if they could get away from him or not. And there was a stump that was there, and the stump said to the girls, "If you get upon me, I can take you to safety, and I can deliver you to a place that you've always wanted to be." So they got on top of the stump, and the stump began to go up, and this is what the native traditions believe became the Devil's Tower. This monolith, this huge rock formation that looks like a stump. And if you look very closely at photos of it, I've never been there myself, maybe some of you have, but if you look at photos, there are lines that are etched into the sides of it from the top to the bottom, and you can imagine a bear clawing at this stump. And so it is said that the girls were raised up into the sky, and from there they were able to step off into the heavens and become the stars that they always wanted to be, and to step into the ethereal. And the brother was able to turn away and move off into the forest and inhabit his life, where he could begin to discover the ways of the earth, the medicines of the earth, the wisdoms of the earth, the blessings of the earth. And throughout time, the brother was able to at night gaze up and see his sisters, and they were in their experience of the ethereal, and to love them and to care for them, and they were able to gaze down upon him with the journey that he had decided that he had taken, that welled up in his heart. Now, what's interesting about mythology is that mythologies can tell you a lot, if you look at them metaphorically, can tell you a lot about the ideas behind it, sort of the psychological ideas. We think about creation myths. Every religion has its myths. And the thing that's interesting about this mythology is that if we look at the idea of God or spirit, or in the tradition of the Native Americans, the Great Spirit showed up in all aspects of this story. First of all, the Great Spirit showed up in the aspirations that welled forth within each of the individuals of the 7 people. That's what we would call in religious science the freedom of expression, something that speaks of our intrinsic nature, that we each have something, some passion that is breaking loose within us, something that we want to do, some inkling of a way we want to express, or some feeling we want to have, some expression of love and peace and joy and abundance that we each have. That is the stuff of spirit. But then the other part of it is the Great Spirit takes those ideas and lays the groundwork, lays out the game, so to speak, so that that can be worked out. The game of 7 children playing in the woods, giving them that opportunity that day when they all woke up and decided they wanted to go in the woods together and play. Great Spirit inhabited that. Great Spirit inhabited the woods to be able to communicate to one of the children, and the stump to communicate with the others. Great Spirit was within that as well. And then within community, if we think of these siblings within their own community, the expression was brought together. We call this synchronicities. And each person was able to step into their expression by coming together in what appeared to be a conflict. Because Spirit doesn't care what avenue it uses. It appeared to be a conflict. And when each individual, again, expressing their freedom, said yes, in religious science we are taught to say yes when the opportunity arises, when the question comes up, would you like to step into the expression? And we say yes. Yes, I would like to inhabit that. Yes, I will come in contact with you. Yes, I will raise up and I will step off into the heavens. I will become the manifestation that I want to be able to take me where I want to go. And the Great Spirit, God, whatever you want to call God, is in each one of those pieces. The idea today is our relationship with oneness, and our relationship with oneness can be very theological. We can talk about it, but the strongest expression of our relationship with oneness is how we act it out, how we step forward and say yes, how we have the audacity to have the passions that we have, the ideas that we have, the journey that we have, the experience that we want to have, all of these desires, and then the courage to step out when we're given the opportunity. That is the relationship of this oneness. When I first became a minister in Paradise, it was a really strange walk for me, and it was a very challenging walk for me to step into that. And there was a woman named Bev who I developed a relationship with, and she was very supportive with me. She was of me and with me, and she was really amazing. And we had a lot in common because I had come, I'd traveled my own journey that finally ended up in ministry, which had a lot of nuances to it. But one of the nuances was I had worked in juvenile corrections and I had worked in parole at one time, and I'd worked for Solano County, which is part of the Bay Area. And Bev was a retired, she's quite a bit older than me when I met her, but she was a retired police officer from Vallejo, California, which is in Solano County. So we knew a lot of people, and we knew a lot of things. And the thing I loved about Bev was she was this incredibly spiritual person. She had this great grounding in all kinds of different teachings, Eastern teachings, Gnostic teachings, and she was a real student of spirituality. And she was she had an intellectualism to it, and she had a refinement to her. And I'll explain her refinement in a moment. She seemed like a refined person, but she also had the street in her because she'd been a cop. And so I love that blend. She could bring it right down into living life. So Bev's story is like this. She was raised in the Northeast, and her father was incredibly wealthy. He was a businessman. Maybe he worked on Wall Street. I don't know, because they lived in New England, just above New York City there. And he made all kinds of money. And she lived a very privileged life. Her mother passed away when she was very young. And what she remembered of her mother, she loved her mother very dearly. But her mother passed away. And Bev was raised Catholic. And when it was time for her to start going to school, they sent her off to boarding schools. And by this time, she had manifested a stepmother. Her father had remarried, and Bev used to say that her stepmother was a very challenged person and a very challenging person, and she felt like she'd kind of been thrown off into boarding school. It was a Catholic boarding school to try and get rid of her. And so Bev, as a young child, she longed for and loved her father dearly. She struggled with her stepmother, and then she goes off to some boarding school further north in the Northeast, in that beautiful country up there. But it was hard for her to enjoy the beauty because she missed home, she missed her father. So she went to boarding school and was there throughout school. And about the time that she became a teenager, when as teenagers our hormones begin to break loose and we begin to explore life, and one of those explorations of life is our own sexuality and relationships and those kinds of things. And she found herself drawn to other girls. She tried to date boys, but she was drawn to girls. And she developed a relationship with another girl at the boarding school, a teenage relationship that was discovered, and their families were notified of what was going on. And being a Catholic school, it was just absolutely, completely forbidden. And so she got herself into a lot of trouble. And what the family did was they ended up finding another boarding school for her, which meant she had to uproot from a place where she'd been for a number of years and go somewhere else. But what really pulled at her heart was the fact that this young teenage love was taken from her, and she never saw her again. But what's interesting about that is that Bev opened up to the pain of that, and she realized it cemented with her a level of comfort in her own sexuality, because she deduced that if I feel this horrendous about this situation, then this must be my true self. No matter what the church says, no matter what my family says, no matter what society says, this must be my truth. And so she began, even though she had to keep it in secret and she had to keep it under wraps, she became very cemented, and she found a strong foundation in who and what she was, and she embraced it. She told me she was always thankful for that. So time went by, and her father and her stepmother confronted her on her sexuality and confronted her on where she was in life. And Bev, she was a very strong-willed person, and she said, "This is who I am." And so basically they said, well, if this is who you're going to be, then you're going to not have your inheritance, which is sizable. If Bev had accepted her inheritance, she would never have to work a day in her life. So she was in despair over that. And one day at her boarding school, a military recruiter came and gave the whole spiel about how you can see the world and everything if you join the military. And it was a girls' school, and that was an empty mind for that recruiter on that day. There wasn't a whole lot of fertile ground there except for one person, Bev. And she said, sitting there, she didn't even give it any thought. She walked up there and she told this guy, "I've got to go somewhere, because when I leave school, so this was her senior year in school, when I leave school, I don't have anybody, I don't have anything, I don't have an inheritance, so this is what I'm going to do. So he signed her up to join the Navy, and she came to the West Coast. And eventually, she ended up in the Bay Area with the United States Navy, and she fell in love with the Bay Area here in California. She fell in love with the beauty of it, the social and cultural and spiritual diversity of it. And she knew she wanted to make it her home because she found a subculture in the Bay Area that would accept her. Because now she had moved not only geographically and physically, but she had moved emotionally and spiritually well past her parents. When adversity came up and when a way forward came up, she said yes. She did the practice of metaphysics. She did the practice of religious science. She said yes. Because Spirit was responding to her deeper, innermost passions. So she did a hitch in the Navy, and she decided when she got out to stay in the Bay Area. And at that time, she found a poster that was recruiting people into law enforcement and especially looking for women at that time. This is probably the early 60s or maybe middle 60s. And in the Navy, she had been exposed to shore patrol and master at arms, those kinds of things, and she liked it. She enjoyed working with people on that level. She liked the rules of it. She liked the structure of it. She liked the authority of it. It spoke to her. And so she went to the academy. There was only one other woman in the academy she went to become a police officer, and she became a police officer. And she settled into Vallejo, California. And it was in Vallejo that she began to open up to other spiritual ideas, Hinduism, Buddhism, the teachings of Jain, the teachings of the Gnostics. And she found a spiritual home. That was the other part of her that had been missing. And so when I got to know her, she was retired, and she had come to Paradise up in that area with her partner from the Bay Area. And when they got to Paradise, her partner decided to move on, and it was devastating to Bev. And up until that point, her spiritual journey had been very much a solitary journey. She'd been a solitary student and had gone to various teachers and things like that. But in her despair, she decided she needed to have a community of some kind. So she looked around and she found the Center for Spiritual Living. And she got involved and she loved the teachings. And that is where she found community. And that's where she found the fulfillment of being with other people, because we all desire to be with other people. We all desire to have other love in our life and other connections. And she dated other people for a while off and on and had brief relationships, but she never really settled on one. And she was solitary until the end of her life, but she was very much involved in the community. And she went along for a while. And then she had manifested some lower digestive issues to where it was very difficult for her to leave home. And so I didn't see her very much, and she would call me and say, "I'm sorry, I can't come over. I have developed a strong relationship with my bathroom, and I need to stay close to it." And so I would go see her, and I was worried about her because she was so social. She'd been involved on the board and involved in all kinds of things in our center and had a great network of friends, and I was concerned about her becoming isolated. And so I would go see her, and when I went into her home, she lived in this cute little mobile home park. She had a double-wide mobile home. She lived there with her cat, who she loved dearly. And I came in, and she was surrounded by her books and her videos. And I remember she had this huge coffee table. That thing seemed like it weighed 1,000 pounds. It had a mosaic on the top of it made of tiles of an Om. And she sat before that and she would meditate. And what I found out was, in talking to her, she had moved into a place in her life where she said, this is a tremendous gift to me, Andy, because I know that I'm in the very last stages of my life, and I can sit and I can read and I can study and I can meditate and I can pray, and I've come into a place of almost developing my own temple. Once again, she said yes, her greatest heart's desire. In fact, Bev began to love her solitude, and she loved her home dearly. To her, it was a castle. It was a refuge. And then finally, she manifested some issues in her health, and eventually she had to be moved into skilled living facilities. And knowing how much she loved her home and how much she loved her independence, I went to visit her. I was concerned, and she met me one day. I came in, she was in the bed, and she had this really big, broad smile. When she smiled, she's the type of person who smiled with her whole face. And she was smiling, and she was telling me how absolutely wonderful the other patients in this facility are, and especially the nurses, and how she opened up to being cared for. And she said, I have been allowed to come back into community. And she knew that this was going to be her launching pad into leaving this world. And she and I had several visits where we imagined her sitting in the terminal of an airport, ready to go. But she's hanging out with a whole bunch of other people. It's amazing to me, and what she taught me was that no matter what comes up in terms of however Spirit provides the opportunity to move forward, our job in this relationship is to say yes and to come into a place of acceptance. When the bear comes, when the forest talks to us, when the stump talks to us, when we have the opportunity to step off into something ethereal, when we have the opportunity in some way, shape, or form to step into this manifestation, its Spirit shows up to us in this relationship, and we show up to Spirit with yes and openness. See, one of the things that attracted me to metaphysics was I was raised in religions where I was here and God was over there somewhere, and what metaphysics taught me was God is right here. God is ever present. I am in God. God is in me. And the innermost God and the God Almighty is one God. And that God is working through us. No matter what our journeys may be, and we each have our own stories about the challenges of our journeys. And these journeys can be very challenging. I work in residential drug and alcohol treatment. And after getting this assignment a couple of weeks ago from Reverend Mary, I've been thinking about our relationship with Oneness. The other day I was doing a group where I work in my day job, and one of our clients who's relatively new in all kinds of angst, in the angst of being caught in addiction and the angst of everything that's gone with it, we were talking about this oneness idea. It wasn't like I was the one who brought it up. It was kind of brought up in the group. And he said, I don't understand this oneness talk. Aren't we all just separate, on our own, alone and lonely? Isn't that who we are? And in a circle of about 15 people, one of the other clients said, I don't feel alone because in this room we have the shared experience. In this room, we have the oneness of capacity. Now, what do I mean by capacity? The capacity of hope, the capacity of love, the capacity of change, the capacity of potentiality. That's what another client had to say to that person. And if you will open up, you can feel the oneness of those capacities. When I first got involved in metaphysics, I heard a term that scared the stuff out of me. And that was the idea of spirit mind. How we are all looking for spirit a lot of times out there somewhere. But this idea of spirit mind, this higher place within us that connects with a higher place out there. I'd like to share something with you from a gentleman by the name of William Martin, who is a Taoist scholar and teacher. And this is a piece he put together. By seeing without judgment or a sense of lack, we become an empty space, not cluttered with our own limited perceptions. In this space, spirit has room to work. Spirit flows like water into all the nooks and crannies of life, nurturing everything without distinction. We do our work or practice, not assuming what is needed, but rather letting the divine moment determine the actions. Not by withholding our intrinsic goodness, but giving nurture wherever it is needed. Not pushing forcefully ahead, but waiting patiently for infinite clarity to emerge. Thus, caring and tenderness arise from who we truly are, the spirit mind. For patience and love are waiting in our hearts to emerge when welcomed. Our relationship with spirit is one of the givingness of spirit and the openness of us. In knowing that wherever we are, God is. In knowing that we live in a universe that cares for us deeply and uses all kinds of ways and opportunities to allow us to say yes and to move forward. So I'd like to end this morning, and I'd like to share something else from William Martin, a shorter piece. I'd like to invite you to close your eyes, and if I can share this with you kind of meditatively or prayerfully. Allowing our energies just to settle just a bit. And William Martin says, tranquility rests within us, softening our edges and bringing us peace. Where does it come from? Someplace we can't name. What is its source? Something inexhaustible. What does it do? Everything that needs to be done. Namaste. Thank you.